Evelyn Marlowe heard her sister's voice carry across that ballroom like a blade finding its mark. My dear sister has spent her whole life loving dead things. Perhaps today she'll finally learn what it feels like to be celebrated. The room laughed. Every single person in that room laughed. Evelyn didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't give Vivian the satisfaction of watching her break in public. She just sat there in her mended dress, in her chair at the edge of everything, and let the laughter roll over her like weather. She'd survived worse. She told herself that. She almost believed it. If this story moves something in you, subscribe and follow every part to the end and drop your city in the comments so I can see just how far this story has traveled. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday, and Evelyn knew what it was before she broke the seal. Vivian's handwriting, looping, deliberate. Every letter formed like it was performing for someone watching. Evelyn had grown up with that handwriting on birthday cards that were really announcements, on apology notes that were really accusations, on letters that always left the recipient feeling somehow smaller by the final line. She opened it anyway. You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Vivian Rose Marlowe and Mr. Clarence Sterling, to be held at Whitmore Hall, the 14th of October. She set it on the kitchen table, picked up her tea, looked out at the pale Virginia morning. She thought about not going. She thought about it for 3 full days. Then her mother called. Evelyn. Her mother's voice had that particular texture, soft on the surface, iron all the way through. You will be there. I didn't say I wouldn't. You didn't say you would. Mama, she is your sister. A pause that had years packed inside it. Whatever else she is your sister. You will go. You will smile. You will behave. Evelyn set the receiver down and looked at her hands. Her right thumb and forefinger were stained faintly yellow cadmium pigment from the landscape she'd been restoring for 3 weeks. A damaged painting from the 1790s that a collector had brought her in pieces. Practically in tears. She'd been putting it back together carefully. Patiently, the way she did most things. She went. She put on the best dress she owned, ivory linen. Simply cut, mended twice at the left hem but clean and pressed, and she drove herself to Whitmore Hall on a cool October morning and told herself it would be fine. It was not fine. She understood that within 4 minutes of walking through the door. The ballroom had been transformed into something that felt less like a wedding celebration and more like a performance. Flowers top to bottom, candles in every window, women in gowns that cost more than Evelyn's rent, men in fine coats talking about land prices and horse stock, and who had recently bought what along the river. The kind of room that had rules she'd never been taught. Evelyn walked in quietly. She always walked in quietly. 34 years of being the sister who wasn't the loud one had made it habit. The whispers started almost immediately. She felt them before she heard them, that particular shift in the air when a room's attention moves like a cold draft. Is that the older sister, the unmarried? She looks... A pause. A carefully swallowed laugh. She looks exactly like I expected. Evelyn kept walking. She found an empty chair near the back, half hidden, behind a large arrangement of late-season roses, and she sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and breathed. She was good at breathing. She'd had a lot of practice. Her cousin Margaret appeared at her elbow first. Champagne glass in hand, expression of pity so open it was almost generous. Evelyn, you came. Vivian invited me, of course. Margaret's eyes moved to the dress. Moved away. I look fine, Margaret. Thank you. I was going to say you look like yourself. I know what you were going to say. Margaret drifted away. People always drifted away from Evelyn eventually. Too still, too quiet, too unwilling to perform the particular brightness that rooms like this one seemed to require. She watched the room, and then Vivian arrived. Vivian Marlowe, already practicing the name Sterling for months, entered her own wedding celebration the way she entered every room she'd ever walked into. Like the room had been waiting for her, which it had. She was 26, and she was beautiful the way that made other women calculate themselves against her without meaning to. Dark hair piled elegantly. A dress that cost more than the painting Evelyn had spent 3 weeks restoring. A smile that reached every corner of her face and meant nothing at all. She moved through the room like water, touching shoulders, accepting compliments, laughing at precisely the right moments. Then her eyes found Evelyn, that smile, the one Evelyn had known since childhood. The one that felt like warmth from across a room but, up close, always had edges. Vivian crossed the floor with both arms already opening. Evelyn. She embraced her. Silk. Her sister's cheek against her own. "I'm so glad you came." "Congratulations," Evelyn said. "He seems like a good man." "'Sis wonderful." Vivian pulled back, held Evelyn at arm's length, looked her up and down with an expression of careful concern. "Is that the dress you wore to Cousin Harriet's garden party?" "It's a dress, of course." Vivian patted her hand. "You always look so pause." That pause. Evelyn had been listening to that pause her entire life. The pause where Vivian slipped the real word in between the ones she said aloud. "You always look so like someone who doesn't belong here." Practical. "Thank you," Evelyn said. Vivian released her hands and turned back to the room. "Stay close, I want everyone to meet my sister." She said sister with a warmth that should have felt like a gift. It didn't. The trouble started an hour later. When the toasts began, Clarence was earnest and slightly nervous, the kind of man who meant well and probably would do right by Vivian. Assuming Vivian let him, his toast was sweet and unremarkable. His brother gave another. Their mother gave a third. Then Vivian stepped forward and took the room. She was radiant. She could call it up at will, that radiance, like turning up a lamp. "I want to say a few words," she began, "about gratitude. About the people who made me who I am." She thanked Clarence. She thanked her mother. She thanked her closest friends by name. Each name followed by a ripple of warm recognition. Then she said, "And I want to take a moment for my dear sister Evelyn." Evelyn went still. "My sister Evelyn," Vivian continued, her voice carrying perfectly, "has spent her entire life dedicated to old things. Old paintings, old documents, old history." A pause. A gentle laugh from somewhere in the crowd. "She is the most patient woman I have ever known. She can spend weeks, months restoring something most people would simply throw away." More laughter. Warmer now. "So I thought," Vivian said, looking directly at Evelyn, that smile at full brightness, "that today would be a wonderful opportunity for my dear sister to experience something she has never quite managed to find for herself. A beat." Celebration. The room erupted. Not all of it was cruel. Some people genuinely heard a sister teasing a sister and found it charming. But Evelyn heard what was underneath it. She had been hearing what was underneath things her whole life. The meaning was clear enough. Here is the older sister. Unmarried, unfashionable, devoted to dead things. The one who couldn't manage what everyone else manages. Isn't it generous of us to let her be here today? Experiencing celebration at second hand. The woman invited as the punchline. Evelyn sat very still. She did not cry. She had promised herself she would not cry. And she kept her promises, even the private ones. She kept her hands flat on her knees. She breathed. She let the laughter move over her like weather she had learned to stand in. And then from across the room a voice. Quiet, but with a quality that cut through the noise the way one clear note cuts through everything else around it. "I didn't realize art restoration was something to be mocked." The laughter didn't die at once. But it shifted, changed frequency, the way a room changes when someone says something unexpected and no one is yet sure how to respond. Evelyn turned. She had noticed him when she first walked in, not because he'd done anything to draw attention, but precisely because he hadn't. A man somewhere in his late 30s, dark-coated, standing near the far window, with the stillness of someone who is comfortable taking up exactly as much space as he needs, and not 1 inch more. He hadn't been performing. In a room full of performers, he had simply been watching. Now he was looking at Vivian with an expression that was perfectly pleasant and entirely without warmth. The Whitmore collection, he continued, his voice carrying without effort, includes 7 pieces restored by an anonymous specialist out of Charlottesville. Over the past decade, a Flemish oil from 1748 considered a complete loss before it was returned to us. 3 American landscapes, 2 portrait miniatures. He paused. The work is remarkable. I have been trying to identify the restorer for years. He looked at Evelyn. I wonder if I'm looking at her now. The room was completely silent. Evelyn looked at him. He looked at her. Your name is Evelyn Marlowe, he said. It is, she said. Alexander Whitmore. A slight incline of his head. Your work is in my library, Miss Marlowe. It is not something I would invite people to laugh at. Vivian's smile held. It was too practiced a smile to fall apart in public. But something behind it flickered a brief adjustment. Fast and precise before she recovered. Alexander. I know what you were doing, he said. The same pleasantness, the same quiet, the same absolute stillness. He set down his glass, crossed the room, pulled out the empty chair beside Evelyn. May I, he said. She looked at him for a moment. It's a free country, she said. That almost made him smile. That it is, ma'am, he sat. Tell me about the Flemish oil. What condition was it in when you received it? Margaret found Evelyn near the dessert table 20 minutes later and gripped her arm with both hands. Evelyn. Her voice was barely contained. Do you know who that is? He told me his name. He owns this hall. He owns the library, the mill, 300 acres east of the river Evelyn. He is the Whitmore. The Whitmore. Why is he talking to you? He's talking to me about my work. Yes. But Margaret. Evelyn gently removed her cousin's hand from her arm. That is a complete sentence. She went back to him. She hadn't calculated it, hadn't weighed it the way she'd learned to weigh most things involving other people. She just went, because the conversation had been interesting. And interesting conversations were not so common she could afford to walk away from one on account of pride. They had been talking about the Flemish oil, the craquelure across the central figure. The original pigment hidden beneath centuries of grime. The damaged varnish that had needed to come off one thin layer at a time, and he had been listening, the way she had almost forgotten people could listen. Not waiting for a pause in which to speak, actually following the thread. Asking questions that showed he'd understood the previous answer. The original commission, she said, was for a merchant family in Antwerp. You can still see the initials pressed into the original frame, or what's left of it under magnification. Lower right corner. I spent 3 weeks just on provenance before I touched the surface. Why does provenance matter that much? He asked. You could restore it without knowing its history. I could. She thought about it. But I'd be restoring it blind. A painting isn't just pigment on canvas. It's a specific act made by a specific person in a specific place. For a specific reason. If I don't know what I'm looking at, I might restore the wrong thing. He was quiet for a moment. That's not just a skill, he said. That's a philosophy, it's both. One doesn't work without the other. He nodded then. Without any change in tone. Did you know the painting was mine when you took the commission? No. The collector who brought it to me didn't name the original owner. Just said it was valuable and badly damaged and that someone had recommended me. Who recommended you? She almost smiled. He wouldn't say. Interesting. Something shifted in his expression, the beginning of something she couldn't read yet. And you didn't press him, I asked. He declined. The work was interesting, so I did it. Just like that, he studied her. Not the evaluating look of a man deciding whether she was worth talking to something different. The look of someone who has found something unexpected and is turning it over carefully, wanting to understand it before he decides what it is. Miss Marlowe, he said, how long have you been doing this work? 12 years. How many pieces in that time? 67 complete restorations. 40 or so partial stabilization, mostly. Canvases that needed to be secured against further damage before anything else happened. And before today he stopped. Chose his next words carefully. Before this afternoon. Did anyone in that room know who you were, what you had done? She considered it honestly. My mother knows I work with old things. My sister knows I work with old things. She paused. That's the extent of it. Your sister, he said. Who just invited a room full of people to laugh at you for working with old things. Yes. Does that, he chose carefully again. Does that not bother you? Of course it bothers me. She said it plainly. No drama in it. I'm sitting here bothered. But there's a difference between being bothered and falling apart. Mr. Whitmore, and I've never seen much point in the second one. That was the moment something in his face changed. The almost smile arrived not quite, but she saw it coming. Saw it in his eyes before it reached anything else. And thought, there he is. Whoever he actually is, underneath all that careful stillness. No, he said quietly. I don't suppose you would. Vivian appeared at Evelyn's shoulder an hour later. She had the grace of someone who had been watching from across the room and had chosen her moment. Alexander. She touched his arm, warm. Easy. You've been monopolizing my sister all afternoon, have I? He glanced at Evelyn. I apologize, Miss Marlowe. Don't, Evelyn said. I've been glad of it. Vivian's eyes moved between them quick. Precise, recalculating. Evelyn, darling, I wanted to make sure you'd eaten. You look like you haven't eaten. I'm fine, Vivian. You look thin. You always look thin when you're working on one of your, she gestured vaguely. Projects. Good. She pivoted back to Alexander. Smile at full strength. I do hope she hasn't been going on too long about her work. She can be a small silvery laugh. Intense. She's always been intense. Haven't you, Evelyn? Too serious about everything. She's been telling me about her work in my library, Alexander said. His voice did not change. I found it remarkable. Vivian smiled. Recalibrated behind the smile, of course. Evelyn is very talented. I've always said so. She not once, not ever. Evelyn had been present for 34 years of things Vivian had said. And that was not among them. I just hope she isn't boring you, Vivian added. She isn't, Alexander said. A pause. Brief. Vivian absorbed it. Well, she patted Evelyn's hand. I'm glad you're getting along. Now, Alexander, I must steal you for just a moment. Clarence's father has been waiting to speak with you about the mill agreement. And I promised. Tell him I'll find him shortly, Alexander said. Pleasantly, without moving an inch. He's been waiting rather a while. Tell him I'll find him shortly, Alexander said again. Same tone, same stillness, same absolute refusal to be managed. A beat. 2. Vivian smiled her best smile, the one that never reached her eyes at close range, and withdrew. Evelyn watched her go, then looked at Alexander. You didn't have to do that, I know. She won't forget it. I expect not. He looked at her steadily. Are you all right? I've been all right all afternoon, I know. I'm asking anyway. She does this, Evelyn said. She's always done this. When we were young, I thought it was because she didn't know better. When I was older, I thought it was because she was afraid. Now, she stopped. Now? Now I think some people need someone to be smaller than them, she said. So they can feel the right size. It doesn't make them evil. It makes them afraid and bad at hiding it. He was quiet. You're very generous, he said finally. I'm very tired of being angry, she said. There's a difference. He looked at her for a long time. Long enough that she noticed. Then the almost smile finished arriving. Fully, slowly, and it changed the whole quality of his face, made him younger. Somehow, more present. Miss Marlowe, he said. I would very much like you to see the rest of my collection. If you'd be willing. She looked at him, measured it the way she always measured things carefully. Honestly, without pretending it was more or less than it was. When, she said. Suits you, she almost smiled back. I have a landscape I'm finishing. Give me 2 weeks. 2 weeks, he said. I'll send word. She left before the dancing started. She retrieved her own coat the attendant had drifted away, pulled it on in the empty corridor outside the ballroom, and stood there listening to the music start up inside. A reel, bright and fast. She stood in the quiet and breathed. She had walked in expecting one thing. She was leaving with something she couldn't name yet. The door opened behind her. She turned, expecting Margaret. Found Alexander Whitmore holding her gloves. "You left these on your chair," he said. She looked at them, looked at him. "Thank you." He held them out. She took them. Their fingers didn't quite touch, but close enough that she was aware of the near-miss of it. "Miss Marlowe." He held the outer door open, not back into the ballroom, but outward, into the October evening, the cool dark, the wide Virginia sky. "May I walk you to your buggy?" She pulled on her gloves one at a time. "Yes," she said. "You may." They walked out together. Out of the warmth and the music and the laughter, into the clean, cold air. The grass whispering along the edges of the path, the first stars showing themselves above the dark hills. She thought about the painting waiting at home, the careful, patient work of putting something broken back together. The way a thing could be damaged all the way through and still be worth saving. She thought about him saying, across that crowded room, in front of everyone who had laughed, "I didn't realize art restoration was something to be mocked." She thought about Vivian's face in the moment after. She didn't feel triumphant. She wasn't built for loud triumph. But she felt something quieter and more durable. She felt seen. Not the version of herself Vivian performed for rooms. Not the version Margaret pitied. Not the version her mother worried over. The actual woman. The one who had been standing here all along. Underneath everything. It was a strange feeling, new enough that she didn't yet know what to do with it. But she decided, willing to find out. 2 weeks passed the way good work always passed for Evelyn, faster than she expected, and slower than she wanted. She finished the landscape on a Thursday morning, set down her brush, stepped back, looked at what had been a ruin 3 weeks ago and was now, if not perfect, at least honest, the original colors restored. The tears sealed, the varnish stabilized against further damage. She had a habit of talking to the paintings when she finished them. Not out loud, just in her head, a quiet acknowledgement. "There you are, I found you." She cleaned her brushes, made tea, sat down at the table and looked at the letter she'd been composing in her mind for 14 days. She hadn't written it yet. She wasn't sure why. Alexander Whitmore had said he would send word, and he had a brief formal note had arrived 3 days after the wedding. Nothing more than a time and a date, and the words "whenever is convenient for you." The offer stands. She had read it 4 times, which was 3 times more than any note that brief deserved. And then she had put it in the drawer, under her work table, and gone back to the landscape. The landscape was finished now. The note was still in the drawer. She took it out, read it again. It was exactly the same as it had been the previous 4 times she'd read it. Brief, put no pressure in it anywhere, which was itself. She had decided, either very considerate or very calculated. And she wasn't yet sure which. She wrote back that she would come on Saturday. She sent it before she could change her mind. Whitmore Hall in the daytime was a different thing entirely from Whitmore Hall dressed for a wedding. The hall itself was large, she had known that, but without the flowers and the candlelight and the crowded performance of wealth. It had a quieter character, worn in places, real, the kind of house that had been lived in for generations by people who cared more about the books on the shelves than the shine on the floors. She liked it better this way. A housekeeper named Mrs. Aldridge met her at the door, a compact, sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, who looked Evelyn up and down with frank assessment of someone who had been observing people at this house for a very long time and had stopped pretending otherwise. "Miss Marlowe," she said, "Mr. Whitmore is in the East Library. I'll take you through." "Thank you, ma'am." Mrs. Aldridge glanced at the leather satchel. Evelyn carried the one with her magnifying lenses and her documentation tools, and the small notebook she took everywhere. "You're the restorer," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am. The Flemish piece in the reading room, Mrs." Aldridge said. "The one they brought back about 6 years ago." "That was yours?" It was. The housekeeper looked at her for another moment, then nodded, once, with the particular approval of someone who doesn't give it easily. "I'll tell you," she said. "We thought that painting was gone for good when it left. There wasn't a soul in this house who thought it was coming back the way it did. It was badly damaged," Evelyn agreed. "It was in pieces." Mrs. Aldridge said this as a simple fact. "Follow me." She followed. The East Library was where Alexander was waiting, standing near one of the tall windows with a book open in his hands that he set down the moment she came in. He was dressed plainly for a man of his position. No performance in the clothes, either. She noticed that. "Miss Marlowe." He crossed the room toward her. "You came. I said I would, I know. I wasn't entirely certain." He stopped. "I'm glad you did." There was a half-second of quiet between them, not uncomfortable, but present. The kind of quiet that comes when two people are being honest with each other, and both of them know it. "Show me what you wanted to show me," she said. He almost smiled. "Right to it. I don't know any other way." "No," he said. "I don't suppose you do." He showed her the collection. It took the better part of 3 hours, not because the collection was overwhelming, though it was significant, but because Evelyn moved slowly through it, the way she always moved through work that mattered. She stopped at each piece, asked questions, pulled out her magnifying lens for 3 of them, made notes in her small book. Alexander walked beside her and said less than most people would have, which she appreciated, and asked questions when she spoke that showed he had been listening, which she appreciated more. The Flemish oil hung in the reading room at the end of the east wing. She stopped in front of it for a long time. "You haven't seen it since you returned it?" he asked. "I never see them after," she said. "I finish, I deliver." That's the end of it. Why? She thought about it. Because once it's back where it belongs, it's not mine anymore. It never was, really. I was just the one taking care of it for a while. She paused, studying the lower right corner, the area she'd spent 2 weeks on, where the damage had been worst, where she'd had to make decisions about what to preserve and what to let go. "How long has it been here? In this family?" "My grandfather acquired it in 1791. It was in the family for 40 years before the damage happened. A fire in the old West Wing. The painting wasn't lost in the fire itself, but the water they used to fight the fire got to it. Water damage on top of fire smoke and heat. That's what I thought." She leaned closer. "You can still see, here just at the edge of the figure's shoulder, where the canvas buckled before I got to it. I was able to bring it mostly back, but not completely." "There's a slight ripple," he said. "I noticed it." She looked at him. "Most people don't. I've been looking at it for 6 years," he said. "I've had time to notice things. Does it bother you?" The imperfection? He considered the question seriously. The way she'd noticed, he considered most things not performing the consideration. "Actually doing it. No," he said. "It tells you something about what it survived. I'd rather have the truth of it than a perfect lie." She looked back at the painting. "That's exactly right," she said. "That's exactly the right answer." From behind them, from the doorway, a sound. Someone clearing their throat. Mrs. Aldridge stood in the entrance to the reading room with an expression that communicated, with considerable efficiency, that it was past the noon hour, and refreshments had been waiting for some time. "I've kept you too long." "You haven't," Alexander said. "Come and eat something. I have a question I want to ask you, and I'd rather ask it where I can see your face properly." They sat across from each other at the small table in the morning room, a room that felt lived in and comfortable, less formal than the rest of the house, and for a few minutes there was just the quiet business of eating. The kind of shared silence that either feels awkward or natural, and this one, Evelyn noted, felt natural. Mrs. Aldridge had produced cornbread and cold chicken and strong coffee. And she had done it with the air of someone who had been keeping people fed through difficult circumstances for decades and considered it her particular form of power. Alexander poured the coffee, waited until Mrs. Aldridge had gone, then set down his cup and looked at Evelyn with the directness she was coming to understand was simply how he was not rude. Not aggressive, just honest. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to know that whatever your answer is, it won't affect anything I've said to you or anything I think about your work." She set down her fork. "That's a significant preamble. It's a significant question." He paused. "Who taught you?" She blinked. Of everything she'd imagined he might ask, and she admitted to herself, imagined several possibilities on the road here. That wasn't it. "I beg your pardon, your technique," he said. "The methodology. The provenance work, before you touch the surface. That's not a common approach. Most restorers I've spoken with work from the surface inward. You work from the history outward. Who taught you that?" "No one," she said. He waited. "My father had a collection," she said. "Small, nothing like this, but real. He loved old things the way some men love horses or land, not for what they were worth, but for what they were. When I was 9 years old, one of his pieces, a small portrait, probably American, circa 1780, started to crack along the surface. He didn't know what to do about it. He was going to take it to a man in Richmond who charged more than we had." She paused. "I asked if I could try first. At 9 years old, I'd been reading everything I could find about it for a year. There was a book of French text, a restoration manual from around 1760. Very technical. I'd been translating it on my own." She said it matter-of-factly. Not modestly and not boastfully. "My French was imperfect. But I understood the principle. And the portrait? It's still hanging in my mother's front room," she said. "I can point to the place where I made my first error. But I don't think anyone else has ever found it." The silence that followed was a particular kind, the kind that happens when a person has said something real and the other person is taking it seriously. "Evelyn," he said her given name. First time, unannounced. "Why are you anonymous?" She looked at him steadily. "What do you mean?" 67 restorations in 12 years. Pieces hanging in libraries and private collections from here to Philadelphia. No name attached to any of it." He leaned forward slightly. "Why?" She picked up her coffee, thought about how to answer. "Because it's not about me," she said finally. "The work isn't about me. The painting isn't about me. My name on it doesn't make it better. It only makes it more convenient for certain kinds of people to decide whether to take it seriously based on who I am rather than what I did." "Certain kinds of people," he said. "Meaning people who would decide that a woman out of Charlottesville working out of a rented room isn't worth the same consideration as a man with a title." "Yes," she said. "Exactly that." He was quiet for a moment. "And has it worked?" "Staying anonymous?" "The work speaks for itself," she said. "That was the idea," he said. "It absolutely does." He paused. "The man who brought you the Flemish piece, the collector who wouldn't tell you my name." "Yes?" "That was Thomas Hewitt." She set down her cup. "Thomas Hewitt." She said the name slowly. "Thomas Hewitt has been acquiring pieces for your family for 15 years. He has, and he brought me the painting without telling you who he was acting for." "He did. Why?" Alexander picked up his own cup. "Because I asked him to," he said. "I wanted to know whether you'd take the commission on its merits, or whether knowing whose collection it belonged to would affect your approach." She stared at him. "You were testing me. I was learning how you work," he said. "There's a difference." She held his gaze. "Yes." He met her eyes. Did not look away. "A test has a pass or fail. What I was doing had neither. I just wanted to understand whether you were the kind of person who treated every piece the same, regardless of who owned it." He paused. "You are. That," she said, "is a very fine distinction, I know. A beat. "You're not angry," he said. "I'm deciding," she said. "About what? About whether to be angry?" She held the cup in both hands. "I don't do it quickly. Getting angry. I find it doesn't help anything to do it before I've finished thinking." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his expression, something she had seen the beginning of at the wedding, when he'd almost smiled. Something that looked, she thought, like the particular respect one person has for another when they've found the thing they weren't expecting to find. Most people, he said, would already be shouting. Most people, she said, don't have much practice deciding between being bothered and falling apart. And there it was, the smile. Full, on this time, about it. It arrived slow and genuine and changed his face completely. Made him look like someone she could know, not just someone she was being careful around. "Miss Marlowe," he said, "I would like to make you an offer." She raised her eyebrows. "This collection," he said, "has 17 pieces that need attention. Not emergency work, nothing, in the condition that the piece was, but proper assessment, documentation, stabilization where it's needed. Some of them haven't been properly examined in 50 years. He paused. "I would like to commission you, formally, under your own name," she went still. "I would like your name attached to the work," he said. "In the documentation, in the records, on the files that go into the library archive, which are, I should tell you, periodically consulted by institutions in Richmond and Philadelphia, and occasionally, further afield." He paused again. "I think it's time the people who look at those records know who did the work." The room was quiet. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that he waited, which not many people would have done. Most would have spoken into that silence, filled it up, explained themselves further or backtracked or qualified. He just waited. "Why?" she said. "Because it's right," he said. "Because the work deserves a name on it. Because," he stopped, chose his words, "because at that wedding 2 weeks ago, an entire room of people laughed at you, and not one of them knew that they had paintings in their houses that you had saved. And I find that I can—" He stopped again. "I find that intolerable," he said quietly. "If you'll forgive me saying so." The silence afterward was its own kind of thing. It was Evelyn who broke it. "I'll need to assess all 17 pieces before I can give you an accurate timeline. Of course. And my fees are fixed. I don't adjust them based on who's paying. I wouldn't expect you to. And I work alone. I don't take assistants, and I don't take observers. While I'm working, not even the owner," he nodded. "Understood. And my name," she said, "goes on the documentation, exactly as I give it to you. No adjustments. Exactly as you give it to me," he said. Nothing changed. She looked at him steadily. Then I exhaled, just barely. She noticed it. "Good," he said, "that's good." She began the following Monday. Mrs. Aldridge gave her a key to the East Wing on the first morning, pressed it into her hand with the particular efficiency of someone who had already decided to trust her and saw no reason to make a ceremony of it. "Mr. Whitmore has left standing instructions," the housekeeper said. "You have access to everything in the East Library and the reading room. The West Library as well, if it becomes relevant. If you need anything, you ask me." "Thank you, ma'am. He'll be in and out," Mrs. Aldridge said. "He runs the mill on Mondays and Tuesdays. Wednesdays he's generally in Richmond on business. The rest of the week he's here, but he has work of his own and he won't trouble you. He mentioned he wouldn't observe while I'm working. He meant it, Mrs. Aldridge paused, looked at her directly. "He means what he says." "Mr. Whitmore. Most people in his position say more than they mean. He's the reverse. Keep that in mind and you'll do fine." She kept it in mind. The first week she barely saw him. She arrived each morning, let herself into the East Library, opened her satchel, and worked. She moved through each of the 17 pieces methodically, not touching them yet. Just essing, looking, taking notes, running her magnifying lens over surfaces and reading what the paint had recorded across decades of heat and cold, of light and darkness, of bad varnish and good intentions, and accidental damage. She talked to them. In her head, there you are. Let me see what you need. On Thursday of the first week, she was working later than she'd intended. The afternoon light shifting into something richer and more golden that made the surfaces easier to read when she heard footsteps in the corridor. Steady, unhurried, she didn't look up from the canvas she was examining. "I said I wouldn't observe," Alexander said from the doorway. "You're not observing," she said. "You're standing in a doorway. That's a fine distinction." She did look up then. He was holding 2 cups. Coffee, the same strong brew Mrs. Aldridge produced. She had learned in the first 2 days that this house ran on it. "Mrs. Aldridge said you hadn't stopped to eat," he said. "I was going to. She said you were going to yesterday too." Evelyn straightened up, pressed the back of her hand against the tension in her neck, and accepted the cup he extended. Their fingers didn't quite touch. "Close," she noticed. "Thank you," she said. "Which one is that?" he asked, nodding at the canvas. "American landscape. Probably 1805. 1810. The provenance documentation is incomplete. I can tell you who owned it in 1860, but not before." She paused. "There's a signature in the lower left corner that's been painted over." "Not accidentally. Someone covered it deliberately." He frowned. "Why would someone cover a signature?" "Several reasons. The artist fell out of fashion, and the owner didn't want to admit the piece was theirs. Or the piece was sold under circumstances the new owner didn't want traced. Or someone was paid not to be credited and honored that even after the fact." She tilted the canvas slightly toward the window. "I should be able to bring it back, carefully. But I want to know what I'm looking at before I do." "Is it always like this?" he said. "Every piece has a story underneath the surface?" "Always," she said. "Every single one." She paused. "The painting doesn't know it's art. It doesn't know it's valuable. It's just what it is, a record. Somebody was here. Somebody saw this thing and tried to hold on to it. The damage is part of the record. The repair is part of the record. Even the covering of the signature is part of the record." She looked at the canvas. "I just try to read all of it honestly." He was quiet for a moment. "Then Evelyn." She looked up. "Why did you never set up a proper workshop?" he asked. "A real one. Your own space, your own equipment. You've been working out of a rented room for 12 years. She was quiet. He paused. "I'm not criticizing, I'm trying to understand." "Money," she said simply. "The commissions are enough to live on, not enough to build on." She paused. "And there's the matter of who takes you seriously when you ask for a loan. A single woman with no husband and no land and no name attached to her work." She stopped. Said it plainly, without bitterness, the way she said most true things. "The bank in Charlottesville told me I'd need a male guarantor. 3 years ago, I told them I'd rather work out of a tent." Something crossed his face. "And the anonymous commissions, that hasn't changed things. I told you." "No name, no credit." He looked at her steadily. She met his gaze and let him hold it. She was used to people finding the truth of her situation uncomfortable. She had stopped finding their discomfort her responsibility. "I want to add something to the commission agreement," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "A proper space," he said. "Here. The old still room at the east end of the building, it's large enough. It has the right light. It's been unused for 30 years. I'd have it fitted properly. The right tables, the right lighting. Storage for materials. It would be yours to use for this commission, and if you were willing for whatever other work you chose to bring here." She stared at him. That she stopped, started again. "That's not a small thing to offer." "No," he said. "It's not." Why? He looked at her directly. "Because the Flemish piece in my reading room," he said, "took you 3 months of work in a rented room, with insufficient light and whatever equipment you could manage. And it came back extraordinary. I would like to see what you can do when you have what you actually need." A pause. "And because stopped. she said. He was quiet for a moment. Long enough that she thought he wasn't going to finish it. Then, because 12 years of excellent work deserves better than a rented room, and a bank that won't give you a loan. The room was very still. That's the most, she sighed again. No one has ever. She couldn't finish that one either. You don't have to answer tonight, he said. Think about it. She looked at the canvas. At the covered signature in the lower left corner. At the record of someone who had been here, who had been covered over, who was still there underneath if you knew how to look. I don't need to think about it, she said quietly. Yes, what neither of them knew. In that room, with the afternoon light fading, and the coffee going cold between them, what neither of them could have known was that less than a mile away, in the parlor of the house Vivian Sterling had moved into 3 weeks before her wedding, a conversation was already underway. Vivian was not a woman who missed things. She had seen Alexander Whitmore cross a crowded room at her own wedding to sit beside her sister. She had watched them talk for an hour. She had watched him hold open a door for Evelyn and walk her out into the evening and come back alone with an expression on his face that she had never seen on any man looking at Evelyn before, not in 34 years. She had thought about it every day since. She had asked, quietly and carefully, through the particular network of women who always know more than they say in communities like this one, whether Alexander Whitmore had received any visitors at Whitmore Hall in the past 2 weeks. She had received her answer on Wednesday. Now she sat in her parlor with her closest friend, Clara Henshaw, a woman whose primary talent was the efficient distribution of information, and she said the word she'd been organizing since Wednesday. I need you to listen to me carefully, Vivian said. And I need you to tell me honestly if you've heard anything. Clara leaned forward. About my sister, Vivian said. And Alexander Whitmore. Clara's expression went through 3 stages: surprise, recalibration, the particular brightness of someone who has suddenly realized they are in possession of something interesting. They were talking at your wedding, she said carefully. They've been meeting at his library, Vivian said. She's there every day this week, supposedly for a commission. Supposedly, Vivian smiled. It was the smile she used when she was certain about something and wanted to be careful about showing it. My sister, she said, has spent 12 years working alone in a rented room and telling herself she doesn't need anyone. She is not a woman who goes to a man's house every day for a commission. Clara was quiet. What do you think she's doing? I think, Vivian said slowly, that she's letting herself believe something that isn't possible. She paused. Alexander Whitmore does not fall in love with women like Evelyn. He is kind to them. He is respectful. He is, she searched for the word, considerate. But that is not the same thing. Clara nodded slowly. And you think someone should think, Vivian said, that people should know the truth, that what looks like professional courtesy cannot be anything more than that. She looked at Clara steadily. I'm thinking of my sister. Truly, she has already spent 34 years not finding what she's looking for. I would hate for her to mistake kindness for something it isn't and embarrass herself. Clara absorbed this. Of course, she said. Of course you're right. I just want what's best for her, Vivian said, smoothing the fabric of her skirt. I've always wanted that. She said it with absolute conviction. She almost believed it herself. Friday afternoon, near the end of Evelyn's first week at the library. She was deep in the provenance documentation for the covered signature landscape when Mrs. Aldridge appeared in the doorway that was controlled in the particular way of someone who has received news they do not like and has decided not to show it. Miss Marlowe, she said. There's a visitor. Evelyn looked up. I'm not expecting anyone. No, Mrs. Aldridge said. You wouldn't be. She said it in a way that told Evelyn everything she needed to know before she turned around and found her sister standing in the doorway of the East Library. Still in her riding clothes, hat in hand, with a smile that was at full strength and eyes that were doing something else entirely. Evelyn, Vivian said. I was riding past and I thought I'd stop in and see how you're getting on. The library at Whitmore Hall was not on any road that anyone rode past. Evelyn had driven the route herself every morning this week. She knew exactly how far out of the way it was. She set down her pen. "Vivian," she said, "what are you doing here?" Vivian didn't wait to be invited in. She never had. Not once in 34 years had Vivian Marlowe Vivian Sterling now. Though the new name still sat oddly in Evelyn's mind, like a coat that didn't quite fit waited at a threshold for permission. She moved through doorways the way she moved through rooms and conversations and other people's lives, as though the space already belonged to her and everyone else was simply occupying it temporarily. She came in now, hat still in hand, glancing around the East Library, with the particular expression she used when she was cataloging something and didn't want you to know she was doing it. "This is a beautiful room," she said. "What are you doing here?" "Vivian, I told you. No one rides past Whitmore Hall," Evelyn said. "It's 3 miles off the main road. You'd have to make a deliberate turn at the Hendricks Fork and follow the river lane all the way up." She paused. "So I'll ask you again." Vivian turned from the window. The smile was still there, but she dropped the pretense of it being casual. That was something, at least. When Vivian stopped pretending. "You were usually getting closer to the truth. I wanted to see you," she said. "Is that so difficult to believe from you? On a Friday afternoon. In riding clothes at a house you have no reason to be at." "Yes, fairly difficult." Vivian sat down, not in the chair Evelyn gestured toward, but in the one nearest the work table. The one closest to Evelyn's open notebooks and documentation. She looked at the notes without touching them, which was almost the same as touching them. "You've been here all week," Vivian said. "I have a commission, so I pause." "Evelyn, I'm not here to cause trouble. I want you to know that. You never think you're here to cause trouble," Evelyn said. "That's never been the issue." Vivian absorbed that without flinching. She had always been good at absorbing things that should have stung. "I'm worried about you. I'm fine. You're spending every day at a wealthy man's house. Alone, and I don't think you understand how that looks." Evelyn set down her pen. Set it down carefully, deliberately, the way she did when she needed her hands to be still so the rest of her could stay calm. "How does it look?" "People talk, Evelyn. You know they do. People talked at your wedding about my dress and my marital status and the fact that I work with old things. People talk regardless of what I do. That has never been a reason to do less. This is different." Vivian leaned forward. "Alexander Whitmore is," he stopped. "Restructured. He's a man of considerable position. And you a woman of no position," Evelyn said. "Say it plainly, Vivian. You're better at plain speech than you think." A flash in Vivian's eyes. "There and gone. I was going to say you're a woman who has spent her whole life protecting herself by not wanting too much. And I would hate to see you." She paused, in that pause as Evelyn heard the machinery of it. The careful selection, the precise placement mistake courtesy for something else. The room was very quiet. "He commissioned my work," Evelyn said. "That is the extent of what is happening here." "Of course," Vivian said. "Of course, that's all it is. I just want you to be careful. He's kind, he is, but men like Alexander Whitmore don't." She stopped again. This time the pause was longer, more deliberate. "They don't end up with women like us. Evelyn, you know that. I'm saying it because I love you and no one else will." Evelyn looked at her sister for a long moment. Looked at her honestly, the way she always tried to look at things she was working on, trying to read all of it. The surface and what was underneath, the record and the damage and the repair, and what had been deliberately covered over. "Is that why you came?" Evelyn said. "To tell me that?" "I came because I'm your sister." "You came," Evelyn said quietly, "because something at your wedding didn't go the way you planned it. And you've been thinking about it every day since. And today you decided to do something about it." She held Vivian's gaze. "I'm not angry. I'm just not going to pretend I don't see it." Vivian stood up. The smile was gone now entirely, which was the most honest Evelyn had seen her face in years. "I'll go," she said. All right, I do love you. Whatever you think. I know you do, Evelyn said. In your way, Vivian left. Evelyn listened to her footsteps down the corridor. The sound of the front door, the distant clatter of a horse being brought around. She sat at the work table and looked at her open notebooks and thought about what her sister had said. They don't end up with women like us. She picked up her pen. Went back to work. She was very good at going back to work. Alexander returned from Richmond on Wednesday to find a note from Mrs. Aldridge on his desk. It was brief. Mrs. Aldridge's notes were always brief. Miss Marlowe's sister paid a call Friday last. Stayed approximately 20 minutes. Miss Marlowe said nothing about it afterward and came back Monday as usual. Thought you should know. He read it twice, folded it, set it in the top drawer. He thought about it all through dinner and most of the evening. Thought about what Vivian Sterling would have said, and how she would have said it, and what Evelyn would have done with it. He thought about the expression on Evelyn's face when she worked that particular quality of focus. The way the rest of the world stopped existing, the way she moved through a piece of damaged canvas with the patience of someone who genuinely believed the thing she was restoring was worth her full attention. He thought about what she'd said about the covered signature. Someone was here. Someone saw this thing and tried to hold on to it. He thought, some people spend a long time being the covered signature. Thursday morning, he found her in the reading room with the American landscape tilted at a precise angle to catch the window light. Her magnifying lens in one hand and her notebook open beside her. I brought coffee, he said from the doorway. She didn't look up. You're not supposed to be in here while I'm working. I'm in the doorway. That argument worked once, she said. I've caught on to it. He set the cups on the small table inside the door far enough from the work and stayed where he was. Your sister came on Friday. She looked up then. Steady. Unsurprised, Mrs. Aldridge told you. I was going to mention it. Were you? Eventually. She set down the lens. Looked at him directly. She came to warn me about spending time here. About how it looks. About what men in your position do and don't. She stopped. About what I should and shouldn't expect. He was quiet for a moment. What did you say to her? And that was the extent of what was happening here. She paused. Which is true.
Yes, she said.
Another pause. Does it bother you? What she said. Vivian has been telling me what I should and shouldn't expect for 34 years, Evelyn said. If I'd listened to her, I'd have given up painting restoration at 9 years old and found something more appropriate to do. She picked up her lens again. So no, it doesn't bother me. I just find it interesting that she came all this way to say it. Interesting how she looked at him. Interesting the way a thing is interesting when it tells you more about the person saying it than about the thing they're saying it about. He absorbed that. She's frightened of you, he said. Evelyn blinked. I beg your pardon? Your sister. She's frightened of you. He said it the same way he said most things, quietly. Directly, without decoration. She was frightened of you at the wedding. That speech she gave it wasn't cruelty, though it was cruel. It was panic. Someone who isn't frightened doesn't work that hard. Evelyn was very still. She's been watching you for 34 years, he said. And she knows something most people in that room didn't. She knows what you actually are. He paused. And that terrifies her. The silence afterward was long and complicated. You don't know her, Evelyn said finally. No, he agreed. But I know what I saw. She looked back at the canvas. The covered signature in the lower left corner. Let's get back to work, she said quietly. He picked up his coffee and left the doorway. She listened to his footsteps fade down the corridor and held herself very still for a moment. Her hand flat on the work table, breathing. She knows what you actually are. She pressed the thought down and went back to the painting. The signature came up on a Friday. Evelyn had been working on the lower left corner for 4 careful days, the most delicate work she'd done in years. One thin layer at a time, checking between each pass. Waiting, checking again. The paint that covered the original signature was a different composition she'd been able to identify, that much from the beginning. Different binder, different pigment, applied at a different period than the original work. Someone had been meticulous about it, not a quick cover. A deliberate, careful erasure. She brought it up slowly. The first letter appeared on a Tuesday, then the second. By Friday afternoon, with the light at exactly the angle she needed, the full signature was visible. She sat back, looked at it for a long time. Then she went to find Alexander. He was in the West Library. Going through correspondence, he looked up when she appeared in the doorway. And something in her expression made him set the papers down immediately. "Come and look at something," she said. He followed her without asking what or why, which she noted. In the reading room, she stepped aside and let him stand in front of the landscape. She had positioned the light exactly. The signature was clear now. If you knew where to look. He leaned in, read it, went still. He stopped, started again. "Is that a Beaumont?" "James Beaumont," she said. "Yes, I believe so." He straightened up slowly. "James Beaumont died in 1812. There are 7 known paintings. Therein one is in the collection at the Philadelphia Academy. 2 are in private collections in New York." He turned to look at her. "This is not a known Beaumont." "No," she said, "it's not, which means someone acquired it. Covered the signature and kept it," she said. "The question is when and why, and whether this piece was ever properly documented as belonging to this family." He looked at her steadily. "What are you telling me?" "I'm telling you," she said carefully, "that before I go any further with this piece, you need to find out where your grandfather acquired it. And whether he acquired it legally." She paused, because if the signature was covered intentionally and the piece was never documented, it might not be ours to keep, he said. "It might not be yours to keep," she said. "I'm sorry." He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that she watched his face move through several things she recognized: surprise, recalculation, the particular quality of a person deciding what kind of man they're going to be in a difficult moment. "Right," he said. "What do I need to find?" She exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Estate records. Acquisition logs if your grandfather kept them. Correspondence from around 1810 to 1815, that period. Anything that mentions a landscape purchase or a gift, or the archive room," he said. "3rd floor. It hasn't been properly sorted since my father's time." He paused. "Will you help me?" She looked at him. "I know, that's not what you were commissioned for," he said. "I'm asking anyway. I'll help." The archive room was exactly what she expected: decades of paper, meticulously kept in some places and completely disordered in others. The way private records always were, when the person keeping them knew what they meant but never imagined anyone else would need to find anything. They worked side by side for 2 hours. Alexander had rolled up his sleeves by the end of the first hour, which she noticed in the way she noticed most things: calmly, factually, without attaching significance to it. He found the correspondence from 1811 in a box that had been mislabeled as mill accounts. "Here," he said. She crossed to him. He handed her the letter. It was from his grandfather, Elias Whitmore, to a man named Joseph Canfield. Dated March of 1811. The language was formal in the way of business correspondence from that period, but the meaning was clear enough once you knew what you were looking for. "The landscape we discussed has been secured. The previous owner's family has been advised that the documentation was lost in the Richmond flood of 1809. The signature has been addressed as agreed. I trust this matter is now concluded." Evelyn read it twice, looked up at Alexander. He'd read it too. His face was doing something complicated. "The previous owner's family," he said. "Yes. Was told the documentation was lost. Yes. So they had no record of owning it. No way to claim it. And someone covered the signature to make it harder to identify." He set the letter down on the table between them. My grandfather stole it. She didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that would make it simpler or more complicated than it already was. Well, he said. He was quiet for a moment. Then we need to find out who Canfield was. And who the previous owner's family was. He looked at her. I can research it, she said. It's what I do. I know, he said. But Evelyn, he stopped. This is going to be more than a commission. If we find them, if the family can be identified, then you'll have a decision to make, she said. About what to do. He looked at the letter on the table. Looked at it for a long time. I already know what I'll do, he said quietly. I just need to know where to take it. Something shifted in her chest. A small, quiet movement she didn't try to name. Then let's find them, she said. What happened next moved faster than either of them expected. Within 3 days, Evelyn had traced Joseph Canfield through county land records, business correspondence in the public archive in Charlottesville, and a chain of acquisition documents that told a story she had seen before in different forms in different damaged paintings, a story about who gets to own history and who gets to say so. Canfield had been a land broker. He had worked in the early 1800s as a middle agent in a series of estate acquisitions that had benefited several of the county's wealthiest families. The Whitmore landscape was not the only piece involved. There were land parcels, there were timber rights, and there was a name attached to the original ownership of the painting, a family called Garrison. Free black landowners out of Albemarle County, who had been systematically dispossessed of 3 properties and multiple personal assets between 1809 and 1814 through a combination of falsified flood documentation and manipulated debt records. She brought it to Alexander on a Wednesday morning. He read through everything she had laid out for him, not quickly, not impatiently, but with the same focused attention he brought to everything. She watched him read, watched his face. When he finished, he looked up. How much of this is actionable, he said. Meaning legally? Meaning if the Garrison family has living descendants, if someone can be found, is there a case to be made? I'm not a lawyer, she said. But the documentation is clear. The letter from your grandfather alone. She paused. The question is whether you want to pursue it. I told you, he said. I already know what I'll do. You know what you'll do about the painting, she said. This is bigger than the painting. He looked at her. I know. It could implicate other families, she said. Canfield didn't work for just your grandfather. If this opens up, he said quietly. If there are other families who were dispossessed through the same mechanism, they deserve to know. He paused, don't they? She looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said, they do. Then we find out who Canfield worked for, he said. All of it. And we take it to the county record office, and we let the documentation do what documentation does. He paused. Can you compile it? All of it into something that can be presented formally. It's what I do, she said. Putting the record back together. Then that's what we do, he said. 3 weeks later, Evelyn was working late in the East Library when she heard the front door of Whitmore Hall open, and then, a moment later, voices she hadn't expected, not Alexander's voice. Not Mrs. Aldridge's. She heard Vivian's voice, lower than usual, with a quality Evelyn recognized but couldn't immediately place. The particular register her sister's voice went to when she was doing something she knew she shouldn't, and a man's voice answering. Someone Evelyn didn't know. She set down Mrs. Aldridge appeared in the doorway of the East Library 30 seconds later. Moving fast and with an expression Evelyn had not yet seen on her face, something between controlled fury and genuine alarm. There's a man named Delacroix, Mrs. Aldridge said. Arrived with your sister. He says he's here on behalf of 3 county families to discuss the Garrison matter. Evelyn stood up. The Garrison matter isn't public yet. We haven't filed anything. Your sister apparently knew about it, Mrs. Aldridge said. Enough to tell someone. The weight of that landed. "Where is Mr. Whitmore?" Evelyn said, riding the south field. "I've sent for him." Mrs. Aldridge paused. "They're in the front parlor." "The man Delacroix is asking to see the documentation you've compiled." A beat. "He's asking for it by name. He knows you have it." Evelyn was already moving. She walked down the corridor, not fast, not running, but moving with the particular deliberateness of a woman who has decided what she's going to do and is in the process of doing it. She pushed open the parlor door. Vivian was standing near the window. Beside her stood a man in his 40s, well-dressed, broad across the shoulders, with the expression of someone who believed he had a significant advantage and was enjoying the moment before he used it. Vivian's face when she saw Evelyn was complicated, something that might have been guilt, overlaid very quickly by the familiar performance of purpose. "Evelyn," she said. "I'm so glad you're here." "I'm sure you are," Evelyn said. She looked at the man. "Mr. Delacroix, Miss Marlowe." He inclined his head. Something in his expression recalibrated when he saw her. He had expected, she thought, someone easier to manage. "I represent several families with an interest in the documentation you've apparently been compiling at this property. We'd like to see it." "You'd like to see private research documents on behalf of unnamed clients," she said. "Without an appointment, without notice, without legal standing that I'm aware of," he smiled. "The families I represent have standing in this matter." "Which families?" "I'm not at liberty." "Then I'm not at liberty to show you anything." She met his eyes. "Mr. Delacroix, whatever you've been told about what I've found and what I've compiled, and I'm very interested in how you were told anything at all. I'll tell you this plainly. The documentation I've compiled is accurate, complete, and is going to the county record office through proper legal channels. If the families you represent have legitimate interests in the Garrison matter, those interests will be addressed through those channels. That's what those channels are for." "The families I represent," he said, the smile gone now, "would prefer this be handled privately." "I expect they would," she said. "That's not going to happen." He looked at her for a moment. Then at Vivian. Something passed between them that Evelyn caught the edge of a glance that confirmed what she'd already understood the moment she walked into the room. Vivian had told him. Vivian had told someone who had told someone. And that chain had led here, to this man, to this moment. And Vivian was standing by the window with an expression that was working very hard to look like concern. "Vivian," Evelyn said. Her sister looked at her. "How did he know what I've found?" Evelyn said. "How does he know the documentation exists? How does he know my name?" A silence. "I was worried," Vivian said. "I was worried about you. I mentioned to Clarence that you were doing research here, and it had become something significant. And he must have mentioned it too. To people who would prefer the Garrison matter stayed buried," Evelyn said. "Yes, I understand." She held her sister's gaze. "Did you know what you were doing when you told Clarence? Or did you just not think it through?" Vivian's face did something complicated and then stopped doing it. "I was trying to protect you." "From what?" "From getting too involved in something that could." "Evelyn, this involves powerful families, people who have held land and money in this county for 60 years. If you file that documentation and it opens up what you think it opens up, then the people who were dispossessed get their story in the record," Evelyn said. "That's the point. That's not." Vivian's voice dropped. "That's not how it works. You know that's not how it works. There are people in this county who will make your life very difficult if you—"
"My life," Evelyn said,
"has been difficult, Vivian, for 34 years. And I have done the work anyway." She kept her voice even. "Quiet. I'm going to keep doing it." The front door of Whitmore Hall opened. Alexander's voice in the corridor, speaking to Mrs. Aldridge, asking what had happened. Footsteps. The parlor door came open. He looked at the room, at Delacroix, at Vivian. He read it in about 4 seconds. "Mr. Delacroix," he said pleasantly, "I don't believe we have an appointment. Mr. Whitmore, Delacroix turned to him with the smile back. Recalibrated for a different audience. I was hoping we could have a private conversation about some research being conducted on your property. The research being conducted on my property, Alexander said, is my commissioned work, and any conversation about it goes through me and through proper legal representation. He held the door open. I'll see you out. A beat. Delacroix looked at Evelyn. Looked at Alexander. Made the calculation. This won't be the end of it, he said. I expect not, Alexander said. Good afternoon, Delacroix left. The room was very quiet. Vivian was still by the window. She looked at Evelyn, with something once was stripped of performance, something that might have been real. Underneath everything. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said. I know, Evelyn said. I was scared for you. I know that too. Evelyn, go home. Vivian, Evelyn said gently. Go home to your husband. We'll talk. But not today. Vivian left. The sound of the front door again. Then silence. Then just the two of them in the parlor. And the afternoon, going gold outside the windows, and the weight of everything that had just happened settling around them, like something that couldn't be put back the way it was. Alexander looked at her. Are you all right? I keep being asked that, she said. You keep being in situations that warrant it, he said. She almost laughed. She hadn't expected to. The documentation is safe, she said. I keep copies. 3 sets, different locations. He looked at her. When did you start doing that? The day I realized what we'd found, she said. I've been doing this work for 12 years, Mr. Whitmore. I know what people do when they're frightened of records. He was quiet for a moment. Then what do we do now? She looked at him steadily. Now, she said, we take everything we have, and we go to the county record office. And we let the documentation do what it does, she paused. And we don't stop. Not for Delacroix, not for whoever sent him. Not for anyone. No, he said, we don't stop. He said we the way she had said it. Not as an accident, not as a figure of speech, as a simple fact about what was true. She looked at him for a long moment, at this man who had crossed a crowded room to sit beside her, who had offered her a proper workspace without being asked, who had read his grandfather's letter and not flinched from what it meant, who was standing here now, saying we don't stop like it was the most natural thing in the world. She thought about what Vivian had said. They don't end up with women like us. She thought Vivian has never understood what like us means. She picked up her satchel from the side table, where she'd set it when she came in. I'll have the full compilation ready by Monday, she said. I'll arrange for legal counsel, he said. Good. She started toward the door. Stopped back, Alexander. He looked at her. Thank you, she said, for coming in when you did. I'll always come in, he said. Quietly, simply, like it wasn't a significant thing to say. Like it was just true. She held that for one moment. Then she nodded and walked down the corridor and out into the October evening. The air sharp and clean, the stars beginning over the dark hills. The satchel with 3 copies of documented truth against her shoulder. She had work to do. She was going to do it. The county record office opened at 8 o'clock on Monday morning. Evelyn was there at 7:45. She had the full compilation in her satchel, 312 pages of documentation. Cross-referenced, dated, sourced to original materials wherever possible. She had worked through most of Saturday night and all of Sunday to get it right. Not because it wasn't right before, but because she understood what she was about to put into the public record, and she wanted there to be no gap in it. No weakness, no single page that anyone could point to and say, here, this is where it fails. She had done this kind of work before. Not legal work, restoration work, but the principle was the same. You did not present a damaged thing to the world until you were certain you had found everything that mattered and put it back honestly. Alexander arrived at 8:05 with his legal counsel, a man named Hargrove. Quiet and precise, who shook Evelyn's hand with the directness of someone who had read her documentation over the weekend and understood exactly what he was holding. "Miss Marlowe," Hargrove said, "this is thorough work." "It needs to be," she said. "It is." He paused. "There are going to be people who push back hard on this, I know. The Canfield connection alone implicates 4 families with significant landholdings. 2 of them have sons on the county board. I know that too." He looked at her steadily. "Are you prepared for what that means?" She met his eyes. "Mr. Hargrove, I have been working anonymously for 12 years because I understood that a woman with my background and my situation could not afford to make enemies. I have been careful and I have been quiet, and I have let the work speak without a name on it." She paused. "I am done being anonymous." "Yes, I'm prepared," he nodded once. "Then let's go in." They filed the documentation at 8:17 in the morning. By noon, 3 people had come to the record office asking to review the newly filed materials. By 2 o'clock, Evelyn had received a note at Whitmore Hall delivered by a boy she didn't recognize. No return address that said simply, "You would be wise to reconsider." She showed it to Alexander. He showed it to Hargrove. Hargrove had it documented and added to the file. "Tampering with a filed record is a separate offense," Hargrove said. "Whoever sent this has just made our case stronger." Evelyn set the note on the table and looked at it the way she looked at damaged canvases, trying to read what was underneath. "You would be wise to reconsider." Not a threat, precisely. A warning. The kind of warning that came from people who believed they still had time to make something go away before it became permanent. They didn't. It was already permanent. The first person to come to Whitmore Hall directly was a man named Franklin Holt. He arrived on Tuesday afternoon in a very good coat and with the bearing of someone who had never in his life been told that a room didn't belong to him. He was 60 years old, heavyset, with the particular quality of authority that comes not from intelligence or character, but from decades of having money and using it as a substitute for both. Mrs. Aldridge brought him to the front parlor, and then came directly to Alexander, with an expression that communicated, without words, that she did not like this man, and wanted it noted. Alexander found Evelyn in the East Library. "Franklin Holt is here," he said. "He's asked to speak with both of us." She set down her pen. "Together?" "Together," he said. "I thought you should know before you decide whether to come." She looked at him. "Why would I not come?" "Because he's going to say things about you specifically," Alexander said. "And I didn't want you to walk in without knowing that." She stood up. "What kind of things?" "The kind of things men like Holt say when they're frightened and need someone to blame." He paused. "He filed a complaint with the county board this morning." "About the documentation. He's calling it fraudulent." She went still for a moment. "Then he's calling my work fraudulent." "Yes." She picked up her satchel. "Let's go talk to Mr. Holt." Franklin Holt was standing when they came in deliberately, she thought, so that the first thing they saw was a large man in an expensive coat filling the center of the room. He looked at Alexander with the recognition of one powerful man for another. He looked at Evelyn the way men like him always looked at her, assessing, dismissing, recalibrating to something he considered manageable. "Whitmore," he said. "I'll speak plainly, I'd appreciate that," Alexander said. "This woman," he gestured toward Evelyn without looking at her fully. The particular gesture of someone who considers the person a problem rather than a person. "Has filed materials with the county record office that make serious claims about my family's acquisition property going back 60 years. Based on what she says is documentation from your archive." "Based on documentation from my archive," Alexander said. "Yes, that's accurate. The documentation is fraudulent." A silence. "Mr. Holt," Evelyn said. Her voice was even. "The documentation includes your family's original purchase agreement from Joseph Canfield, dated 1812. It includes a letter from Canfield to the previous landowner's representative, stating that the deed transfer was being processed through the county clerk. It includes the county clerk's record, the actual record, not a copy showing that the deed was filed under a different parcel number than the one described in the original agreement. effectively hiding the transfer. She paused. Which of those documents is fraudulent? He looked at her fully for the first time. Where did you get those materials? Public record, she said. The clerk's records have always been public. The Canfield correspondence was in the Whitmore archive, which Mr. Whitmore gave me access to as part of my commissioned work. She paused. I'm a restoration specialist, Mr. Holt. I find what's been covered over. That's what I do. Something shifted in his face. The dismissal was gone. What replaced it was harder. Young woman, he said, you don't understand what you've gotten yourself into. I understand exactly what I've gotten into, she said. The question is whether you understand what you've gotten into by filing a fraud complaint against accurate documentation. Because that complaint is now also part of the public record. And it will be answered in the public record, with the original materials. She looked at him steadily. Every one of them. Holt looked at Alexander. You're going to let this stand. I'm going to let the record stand, Alexander said. Yes. Do you understand what this opens up? The Canfield transactions touched a dozen properties in this county. If this goes to a formal hearing, then it goes to a formal hearing, Alexander said. And the families that were dispossessed will have their documentation in the public record, and the county will have to address it. He paused. That's how it's supposed to work, Mr. Holt. Holt looked between them. His jaw was tight. Something in his face had gone past anger into something colder and more considered. You're making enemies, he said. Both of you. I've had enemies before, Evelyn said. I've had people tell me my whole life that I was doing the wrong thing by doing the right thing. That the world didn't work the way I thought it did. That I should be smaller and quieter and more careful. She held his gaze. I've been small and quiet and careful for 34 years. Mr. Holt, I'm done with it. He left without another word. The front door closed. Mrs. Aldridge appeared from the direction of the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of someone who had been listening through the wall and was not ashamed of it. Well done, she said, to both of them, and went back to the kitchen. The formal hearing was set for the 3rd week of November. In the 5 weeks between filing and hearing, several things happened in rapid succession. Clara Henshaw, Vivian's friend, the woman whose primary talent was the efficient distribution of information, distributed information. Widely, enthusiastically, in the particular way of someone who had been told a story by one person and was now the story was more complicated than she'd been led to believe, and was processing this discovery publicly and at some volume. What Clara distributed was not false, exactly. It was a particular selection of true things arranged to imply a different truth. The story, as Clara told it to the women of the county, was this. Evelyn Marlowe, the unmarried older sister of Vivian Sterling, had been spending every day at Alexander Whitmore's property under the guise of a commission, had apparently convinced him to support some kind of investigation into old land records. And the whole thing was raising questions about motives whose exactly, and of what kind was left to the imagination of whoever was listening. Evelyn heard about it on a Wednesday from her mother, who called in the afternoon with a voice that was doing its best to be gentle and was not quite managing it. People are talking, her mother said. People have always talked. This is different. Evelyn, some people are saying that you've involved yourself with Mr. Whitmore in a way that isn't that there are questions about She stopped. About your conduct. My conduct, Evelyn said, has been to do my job, I know that. But Evelyn, Mama, she said it quietly. I know what people are saying. I know who started it, and I know why. And I need you to understand that I am not going to stop what I'm doing because it makes people uncomfortable. She paused. I need you to trust me. A silence on the line, long enough to be its own answer. Then her mother said, I do trust you. I know, Evelyn said. I know you do. She hung up and sat at her work table for a long moment. The still room that Alexander had fitted out for her, the right tables, the right lighting, The proper storage was around her, and she looked at it the way she sometimes looked at a restored painting in the final days of work, checking for anything she'd missed. She hadn't missed anything. She picked up her pen and went back to the preparations materials for the hearing. The twist arrived on a Thursday, 10 days before the hearing, and it came from a direction she hadn't expected. Thomas Hewitt, the collector, who had brought her the Flemish piece, who had refused to name Alexander as the original owner, who had been the beginning of all of this, came to Whitmore Hall, unannounced. Mrs. Aldridge brought him to the East Library, with an expression that told Evelyn this was not a social call. He was a man in his 60s, lean and weathered, with the face of someone who had spent a lifetime knowing more than he said. He looked at Evelyn with something she couldn't immediately identify, and then identified as guilt. "Miss Marlowe," he said, "I owe you an explanation." She set down her work. "Mr. Hewitt." He sat, pulled off his hat, turned it in his hands. "I've been following what's happening with the Garrison documentation." "What you found?" He paused. "I need to tell you something that I should have told you before I brought you that painting." She waited. "I knew what you'd find," he said. "Not specifically. But I knew the Whitmore collection had pieces in it that didn't have clean provenance. I'd known for years. I brought you the Flemish piece." He stopped. "Because I believed you were the only person who would both find the truth and know what to do with it honestly." She looked at him steadily. "You used my work to start an investigation you didn't have the standing to start yourself." "Yes, without telling me." "Yes." He met her eyes. "I'm sorry for that. I am genuinely sorry. You deserve to know what you were walking into." She was quiet for a long moment. "Is there more?" she said. "More than what I've already found?" He looked at the hat in his hands. "The Garrison family," he said. "The ones dispossessed of the land and the painting and the timber rights. I've been in contact with a descendant for 3 years. A woman named Ruth Garrison. She lives in Fredericksburg. She's been trying to document what happened to her family's property for 15 years, and she keeps hitting walls because she doesn't have access to the records that would confirm what she already knows." He looked up. "She needs to see what you compiled, and she needs someone to stand with her at that hearing." The weight of it settled around Evelyn like something physical. "Why didn't you just tell me?" she said. "From the beginning. Why didn't you say, here is a family that was wronged. Here is the documentation that's needed, will you help?" "Because," he said quietly. "A woman with no name on her work, working alone in a rented room, asked by a stranger to challenge 4 of the wealthiest families in the county, you might have said no. You should have said no." He paused. "But the work was real. And you'd find what was there, and once you found it." "Once I found it, I couldn't put it back," she said. "No," he said, "you couldn't." She thought about the covered signature. The landscape she'd tilted at precisely the right angle to catch the light. The letters she'd brought up one thin layer at a time, patient and careful, because she believed the thing underneath was worth finding. "I need to meet Ruth Garrison," she said. Hewitt exhaled. "I was hoping you'd say that." "Arrange it," she said. Before the hearing, Ruth Garrison was 51 years old, and she arrived at Whitmore Hall on a Saturday morning with a carpetbag full of her own documentation letters, family records, a hand-drawn map of the original Garrison land that her grandmother had made from memory in 1860 because the actual deed had been taken. She sat across from Evelyn at the work table in the stillroom, and for a moment they just looked at each other, 2 women at a table with the record of a wrong between them. "Mr. Hewitt told me what you found," Ruth said. Her voice was steady, careful, the voice of someone who had learned to hold themselves very still around things that mattered enormously. Evelyn recognized it. "The documentation is solid," Evelyn said. "The Canfield letters, the misfiled deed, the correspondence between your family's representative and the clerk's office that was never answered because the clerk was already working with Canfield." She paused. "It's all there." Ruth opened her carpetbag, set her grandmother's map on the table between them. My grandmother drew this in 1860, she said, 46 years after they took it. She drew it from memory. Every field, every boundary marker, every tree she could remember. Her hand rested on the edge of the paper, not quite touching it. She said, "Keep this. Someday someone will need to know it was real." Evelyn looked at the map for a long moment. "It was real," she said. "I can prove it was real." Ruth looked at her. "Will you stand with me at the hearing?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Yes. You understand what it will cost you," Ruth said. It wasn't a question. These families have influence in this county. What they couldn't do to the documentation, they'll try to do to the people presenting it. "I know," Evelyn said. "I've already received one warning." "I've received several," Ruth said. "Over 15 years. They looked at each other across the table. Two women who had spent their lives being told to be smaller and had kept going anyway. "Then we do it together," Evelyn said. Alexander came to the still room late that Saturday afternoon. After Ruth had gone, he found Evelyn at the work table with Ruth's grandmother's map spread open in front of her and her own documentation stacked to one side. And he stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at her before she looked up. "She's remarkable," Evelyn said. "I know," he said. "I met her briefly in the front hall." He came in, crossed to the table, looked at the map, was quiet for a moment. 46 years, he said. Her grandmother kept this for 46 years. She believed someone would need it, Evelyn said. "Someday." He looked at her, "And now someone does, now someone does." She paused. "Alexander, I need to tell you something." He waited. "Hewitt knew," she said, "when he brought me the painting. He knew the collection had provenance problems, and he brought it to me, deliberately, believing I'd find what was there." She paused. "He used my work as a way into this without telling me what I was walking toward." She watched his face process this the same way she'd watched it process his grandfather's letter. The same way it had processed Holt's visit, and Delacroix's appearance, and everything else that had come at them in the past weeks. The same controlled, honest reckoning. "Are you angry?" he said. "I've been deciding," she said. "The same way I always decide." She looked at the map. The work needed to be done. The truth needed to come out. Ruth Garrison's grandmother kept a hand-drawn map for 46 years, on the chance that someone would find the record and know what to do with it. She paused. "If Hewitt had come to me honestly, I would have said yes." "So you're not angry," he said. "I'm tired of the long way around," she said. "I'm tired of people deciding for me what I can handle." She looked at him directly. "Including you with the Flemish piece. Including Hewitt. Including every person who has ever looked at me and decided I needed to be managed toward the right conclusion rather than trusted with the truth." He held her gaze. "That's fair," he said. "That is completely fair, I know." She looked at the map again. "I'm not leaving," she said. "I'm not stopping. I'm going to stand at that hearing with Ruth Garrison, and I'm going to present every page of that documentation, and I'm going to let it say what it says." She paused. "I need you to understand that clearly. Whatever happens after." "I understand it," he said. "You may lose standing in this county," she said. "People who were willing to do business with you last year may not be willing after the hearing. The families Canfield worked for are people you have relationships with, had relationships with," he said quietly. "Alexander Evelyn." He said her name the way he always said it now without announcing it. Just using it, as though it had always been his to use. "I read my grandfather's letter. I know what was done. I know what it cost to correct it, and I know what it costs not to." He paused. "There is only one of those things I can live with." She looked at him. This man who had sat down beside her in a room full of laughter. Who had said I didn't realize art restoration was something to be mocked into that silence and meant every word of it. Who had read a letter that condemned his own family and asked, "What do we need to find?" Who was standing here now telling her that he understood the cost and had already paid it in his mind, and there was no argument she could make that would move him. She thought about what Vivian had said. They don't end up with women like us. She thought Vivian has never understood that ending up is not the point. The point is who you are while you're getting there. Then we go to the hearing together, she said. Yes, he said. We do. A pause. Something between them that hadn't been named yet, and both of them knew it, and neither of them reached for it. Because this was not the moment, and they were both people who understood the difference between the right thing and the right moment for it. I should finish the preparation materials, she said. I know, he said. He didn't move immediately, Evelyn. She looked up. Whatever happens at the hearing, he said. Whatever comes after. I need you to know something. She waited. I told you that I commissioned your work because the Flemish piece was extraordinary and because your name deserved to be on it. He paused. That's true. It's not the whole truth. She went still. I commissioned your work, he said, because at my sister-in-law's wedding, surrounded by people performing their best versions of themselves, there was one woman who was just herself, completely and without apology, sitting in a chair at the edge of the room like she'd decided long ago that the edge was exactly where she was supposed to be. And she was fine with that. And I thought, I want to know that person, not what I can do for her. Not what she can do for my collection, just that person. Another pause. I thought you should know that. The still room was very quiet. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that someone else might have filled the silence. He didn't. I know, she said finally, softly. I think I've known for a while, and he said. And, she said, I'm standing at a hearing in 10 days that is going to make a great deal of noise in this county. And I'm not ready to make any decisions until the noise settles, and I can see clearly what's on the other side of it. That's fair, he said. It's not a no, she said. The almost smile arrived. She knew it by now the way it came, slow and real. I know, he said. I can wait. You might have to wait a while, she said. Miss Marlowe, he said. I've been waiting 12 years to find out who restored my Flemish painting. I believe I can manage a little longer. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she turned back to her work. Behind her, she heard him leave the room. Heard his footsteps down the corridor. Heard the house settle back into its particular quiet around her. She looked at Ruth Garrison's grandmother's map, at the hand-drawn boundaries of a piece of land that had been taken and denied and covered over for 60 years. Keep this. Someday someone will need to know it was real. She picked up her pen. 10 days. She had work to do. The hearing was set for 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. Evelyn arrived at 8. She wore the same ivory linen dress she had worn to Vivian's wedding, mended at the left hem. Clean and pressed. She had thought about wearing something else. Had stood in front of her wardrobe for a full 3 minutes considering it. Then she had taken out the ivory linen and put it on. Because she was not going to walk into that room pretending to be someone she wasn't. And she had never been someone who dressed to perform. She was going to walk in as herself, completely and without apology. The same way she'd sat in that chair at the edge of the room 2 months ago and let the laughter move over her like weather. She had her satchel, 312 pages of documentation, plus Ruth Garrison's grandmother's map, plus Thomas Hewitt's signed statement about the provenance of the Flemish piece, plus the original Canfield letters, plus the clerk's records showing the misfiled deed. Everything. Nothing missing. Nothing weak. Ruth Garrison was already there when Evelyn arrived. Sitting in the corridor outside the hearing room with her carpet bag on her lap and her hands folded on top of it. She looked up when she saw Evelyn and something in her face settled, not relief exactly, but the particular steadiness of someone who has been waiting alone and is no longer alone. You came early, Ruth said. I'm always early, Evelyn said. She sat down beside her. How are you scared? Ruth said. Plainly, without apology. I've been working toward this for 15 years and now that it's here I'm scared. That's sensible, Evelyn said. It means you understand what it is. Ruth looked at her. Are you scared? Evelyn thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. Different kind of scared than you. You've got 60 years of your family's history riding on this morning. She paused. I've got my name on the documentation. For the first time in public. She paused again. I've been anonymous for 12 years. Today everyone in that room is going to know who I am and what I've found, and they're going to decide whether to believe it or not. She stopped. Yes, I'm scared. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and put her hand over Evelyn's. They sat like that for a minute. Two women in a courthouse corridor with the weight of history in their bags and the morning coming in through the high windows. And neither of them said anything else, because there wasn't anything else to say. Then the door at the end of the corridor opened, and Alexander came in with Hargrove. And behind them, unexpectedly, Thomas Hewitt. Alexander looked at Evelyn the moment he came through the door. She looked back. Something passed between them, not words. Not even a gesture. Just the acknowledgement of two people who have been through something together and are about to go through something more. Are we ready? Evelyn stood up. Ruth stood up beside her. Yes, Evelyn said, we're ready. The hearing room held approximately 40 people and it was full. She had not expected that. She had expected the board members. Legal counsel for the families being implicated, perhaps a few observers. What she found instead was a room that had clearly been the subject of considerable circulation of information, Clara Henshaw's particular talent at work. She suspected, and that held not just the county board and the lawyers, but a substantial portion of the county's social community. Present either out of genuine interest or the particular excitement of watching something significant happen to people they knew. She saw Franklin Holt in the second row, jaw set. Beside two other men she recognized from the documentation, the Alderton family's eldest son, a man named Prescott, whose grandfather had acquired timber rights through the same Canfield mechanism as the garrison land. She saw Margaret in the fourth row, wide-eyed, clutching her hat. She saw in the far corner near the back Vivian. Vivian was sitting very still. She was not with Clara Henshaw. She was alone, and she was watching Evelyn with an expression that Evelyn couldn't read from across the room and didn't try to. She looked away, sat down beside Ruth at the long table Hargrove had arranged for them. Set her satchel on the table, opened it, put her hands flat on the documentation and breathed. The board convened at 9 sharp. The chairman was a man named Judge Alden Morse, 65. Sharp-eyed, with the economy of motion of someone who had been presiding over difficult proceedings for 30 years and had seen most of what people were capable of in both directions. He looked at the room, at the two tables of counsel, at Evelyn and Ruth, and then he looked at the documentation Hargrove had submitted and said, "We're here to evaluate the validity of materials filed with the County Record Office on the 14th of November. Mr. Hargrove, you may begin." Hargrove began. He was good at it, precise. Methodical, building from the earliest documented evidence forward through 60 years of transfers and falsifications and covered signatures and misfiled deeds. Evelyn sat beside him and handed him documents when he asked for them and watched the room as he spoke. She watched Holt's face go through several stages. She watched the Alderton son lean toward his lawyer and whisper. She watched Judge Morse read each document as it was presented with the focused attention of someone who had not made up his mind yet and was not going to until the evidence gave him reason to. 20 minutes in, the lawyer for the Holt family stood and said, "I object to the characterization of these documents as primary sources. The chain of custody is unclear." Hargrove looked at Evelyn. She was already opening to the right section. Chain of custody for each document is documented on pages 47 through 89 of the submitted materials, she said. The Canfield letters were found in the Whitmore Archive, which has been in continuous family possession since the 1790s. The clerk's records are original county documents, still held by the county. The acquisition agreement is cross-referenced against the original deed filing, which is also a county document. She looked at the lawyer steadily. The chain of custody is not unclear. It's one of the strongest parts of the file. The lawyer sat down. Judge Morse looked at Evelyn for a long moment. You compiled this documentation. Miss Marlowe? I did. All of it. Over 6 weeks using primary materials from the Whitmore Archive and the Public County Record. And your professional background? I am a restoration specialist. I have been working with historical documents and artwork for 12 years. Part of my methodology is provenance research, tracing the origin and history of pieces before I restore them. She paused. In this case, the provenance research revealed something that went beyond the scope of the original commission. And you pursued it anyway, Morse said. Yes. Why? She looked at him directly. Because the record existed. And a record that exists deserves to be read honestly. The room was very quiet. Morse looked at her for another moment. Then he nodded once and turned back to Hargrove. The first major break came 40 minutes in. And it came from a direction nobody expected. The Prescott family's lawyer had been whispering with his client through most of Hargrove's presentation. And when Hargrove paused to allow the board to review a set of documents, the lawyer stood and said, "The Prescott family would like to make a statement." Morse looked at him. "This is not a time designated for statements." "I understand, Your Honor. This is the family has something to offer to the proceeding that may be relevant to the board's evaluation." A pause. "Go ahead." The lawyer glanced at his client. The man beside him, Edmund Prescott, 43 years old, third generation of a family that had built significant timber wealth on land that Canfield had helped them acquire, stood up. He was pale. He had the look of a man who had been up most of the previous night. "My grandfather knew," he said. "That's what I want to say. He knew what Canfield was doing, and he benefited from it. I found his journals last month after Miss Marlowe's documentation was filed. I've had them authenticated." He set a stack of pages on the table in front of him. "I'd like to submit them to the record." The room erupted. Not loudly, this was not a room that permitted loud eruptions, but in the particular way of a formal gathering where something has just happened that nobody expected and everyone is calculating what it means simultaneously. Holt turned and looked at Prescott with an expression of pure betrayal. Prescott did not look back. Judge Morse brought the room back to order in under 30 seconds, which said something about 30 years of practice. "The Prescott materials will be received. We'll take a brief recess. During the recess, Evelyn stepped into the corridor. She needed 30 seconds of quiet, the way she sometimes needed to step back from a canvas and let her eyes reset. Just a moment. Just herself. She got about 20 seconds before she heard footsteps she recognized. She turned. Vivian was standing in the corridor, hat in hand, exactly as she had stood in the doorway of the East Library at Whitmore Hall 6 weeks ago. Except that the expression was different now. The smile was gone. Not suppressed, not managed, gone. "Evelyn," she said. "Vivian." She waited. "I need to say something." Vivian's voice was lower than usual. "The register it went to when she was being real. And I need you to let me say it without me managing it." "I'm going to try not to manage it." Evelyn folded her hands in front of her. Waited. "I told Clarence about what you'd found," Vivian said. "I knew he'd tell people. I knew which people he'd tell." She paused. "I told myself I was worried about you, that I was doing it for your protection, that you were getting in over your head and since someone needed to." She stopped. "That's not true. It's not the whole truth, I know," Evelyn said. "I was afraid," Vivian said. "I have been afraid of you since we were children. Since you were 9 years old and you fixed Father's painting and he looked at you like you'd done something he couldn't understand. Something beyond him, and I thought, she's going to be the one they remember." Her voice was very steady. "It was costing her something to keep it that way. I spent 30 years trying to make sure that didn't happen. Making you smaller so I could feel the right size." She paused. "I know what that is. I know what it makes me." The corridor was quiet. "I sent Delacroix to get the documentation," Vivian said. "Not just Clarence. That was me too. I arranged that." She looked at Evelyn. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know. And because I'm going to tell Hargrove too." if you think that matters to the case." Evelyn looked at her sister. Looked at her the way she looked at damaged things, trying to read all of it. The surface and what was underneath, the record and the damage. "Why now?" she said. "Because I sat in that room and I watched you," Vivian said. "I watched you sit there with your satchel and your documentation in, that woman from Fredericksburg beside you. And I watched you hand documents to the lawyer and answer the judge. And I thought," she stopped, pressed her lips together. "I thought, there she is. That's who she always was. And I spent 30 years being afraid of it instead of," she stopped again. "Instead of," what Evelyn said. "Instead of being proud of it," Vivian said. Quietly, simply, performance. "You're my sister. And I have spent 30 years being afraid of you, instead of being proud of you." And her voice finally broke. Just slightly. Just once. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. I'm genuinely sorry." The silence that followed was long. Evelyn thought about the covered signature. The deliberate, careful erasure of someone who had been there all along. She thought about Ruth Garrison's grandmother drawing a map from memory 46 years after the land was taken, because she believed that someday someone would need to know it was real. She thought about what it costs a person to keep covering something over for 30 years. What it takes out of you, what you become. "I know," she said, finally. Vivian looked at her. "I know you're sorry," Evelyn said. "And I know it's real." She paused. "I'm not going to pretend the last 30 years didn't happen. I'm not going to tell you it's fine. But I'm also not going to be done with you. Vivian, you're my sister. In your way. You've always loved me." Vivian exhaled. Something in her face released, not all the way, but enough. "What do I do," she said, "to make it right?" "Tell Hargrove everything," Evelyn said. "About Delacroix, about Clarence, all of it. Let it go into the record." She paused. "That's how you make things right. You let the record say what it says." Vivian nodded. "Once. All right." The door to the hearing room opened. Mrs. Aldridge, who had come to the hearing, entirely of her own volition, and occupied a seat near the front with the air of someone who had every right to be there, leaned into the corridor. "They're resuming," she said. Her eyes moved from Evelyn to Vivian and back. She said nothing else. She didn't need to. "Come in," Evelyn said to Vivian. "Come and sit with Ruth." "You want me?" "You're my sister," Evelyn said. "Come and sit with us." The hearing ran for 4 hours. Hargrove presented. The opposing lawyers challenged. Judge Morse questioned. The Prescott journals were entered into the record. Vivian's statement about Delacroix was entered into the record. Evelyn answered 7 direct questions from the board, with the same steadiness she brought to a canvas, not defensive. Not aggressive, just honest. "Here is what I found. Here is where I found it. Here is how I know it's true." Ruth Garrison spoke for 20 minutes. She was the last person to address the board before deliberation. And she spoke without notes, which Evelyn had not expected. She stood at the front of the room, and she talked about her grandmother drawing a map from memory at 60 years old, because she wanted her granddaughter to know that the land had been real, that the family had been there, that what was taken had been real and not imagined. She talked about 15 years of trying to find someone who would look at what she had and take it seriously. She talked about a woman who had taken it seriously. She did not look at Evelyn when she said it. She looked at the board. But Evelyn felt it anyway. The room was completely silent when Ruth sat down. Judge Morse looked at the board members on either side of him. Looked at his notes. Looked at the stack of documentation on the table in front of him. "We'll deliberate," he said. "Clear the room." They waited in the corridor for 1 hour and 40 minutes. Ruth sat. Alexander stood. Hargrove paced, which Evelyn found reassuring. A lawyer who paced during deliberation was a lawyer who cared about the outcome. Thomas Hewitt sat near the window and said nothing, which was also reassuring in its own way. Vivian sat beside Ruth. They didn't speak much, the two of them, Ruth and Vivian. the woman who had been wronged, and the woman who had tried to make the wrongdoing worse. But they sat beside each other, which was something. Which was, Evelyn thought, the beginning of something. Alexander came and stood beside Evelyn near the far wall. "How are you?" "He's tired," she said. "Ask me again in an hour. I'll ask you as many times as it takes." She looked at him sideways. "That could be a very long time, I told you," he said. "I can wait." She almost smiled, the almost smile that she had learned from him without meaning to. The door opened at 2:30. Judge Morse stood in the doorway. "We're ready." The board's ruling was 12 pages long, and Judge Morse read the summary aloud. The garrison documentation was found to be credible and complete. The Canfield transactions were found to constitute a pattern of fraudulent deed manipulation across no fewer than 6 separate property acquisitions between 1809 and 1816. The families whose acquisitions were found to derive from those transactions, Holt, Alderton, and 2 others, were ordered to appear before the board within 30 days to begin proceedings determining appropriate remedy. The Garrison family's original land claim was entered into the county record as a verified historical holding. The Prescott family, having cooperated with the investigation and submitted corroborating documentation, was placed on a separate track with more favorable terms. And then Judge Morse looked up from his papers and said, "The board would like to note, for the record, the quality of the historical documentation compiled by Miss Evelyn Marlowe of Charlottesville. In 30 years of reviewing county records and historical materials, I have rarely encountered work of this precision and thoroughness. The board recommends that Miss Marlowe's name and methodology be entered into the County Historical Archive as a model of responsible provenance research." The room was quiet. Ruth Garrison put her face in her hands. Not crying, or not only crying. Something larger than crying. The particular release of a person who has been carrying something for 15 years and has just felt it shift. Evelyn put her hand on Ruth's back and held it there. Outside the courthouse in the November afternoon, the air was cold and clean, and the sky was the particular deep blue that Virginia saved for the days when it wanted to remind you that it was beautiful whether you were paying attention or not. Holt left without speaking to anyone, which was its own kind of statement. The Alderton son spoke briefly with his lawyer and left. Prescott stopped near the door and looked at Evelyn for a moment. Started to say something, and then just nodded a small, real acknowledgement and went. Margaret appeared from somewhere and embraced Evelyn with a force that suggested she had been recalibrating for 2 months and had finally arrived at a conclusion. "I'm sorry. For the wedding. For all of it. It's all right." "Margaret," Evelyn said. "It's not," Margaret said. "But I'm going to do better." Thomas Hewitt shook Evelyn's hand. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you," he said. "From the beginning." "You deserve," she said. "I did." She paused. "But the work needed to be done, so." He nodded, held her hand for an extra moment, then let go and left. Ruth Garrison stood with her carpetbag and her grandmother's map carefully refolded, carefully returned, and looked at Evelyn with the expression of someone who does not have words for what they want to say, and knows it. "My grandmother would have wanted to meet you," she said finally. Evelyn felt that in her chest, in the particular place where true things landed. "I would have wanted to meet her," she said. The map she drew it was extraordinary. The detail, the accuracy from memory after 46 years. She always said she could close her eyes and walk every inch of that land, Ruth said. She said the land knows you were there, even if the paper doesn't. Now the paper does too, Evelyn said. Ruth looked at her. Then she embraced her briefly. Fiercely, the way people embrace when they have been through something together that changed them both. Then she picked up her bag and walked to where her own carriage was waiting. And Evelyn watched her go. Alexander came and stood beside her. They were the last two on the courthouse steps. The afternoon was going gold, the particular October gold that Virginia did in the late afternoons. Slow and generous. She was aware of him beside her the way she had been aware of things all day. The way she was aware of most things she cared about quietly. Completely, without looking away from it. "Well," he said. "Well," she said. A pause. "The noise," he said. "Has it settled enough?" She thought about what she'd told him in the still room. "I'm not ready to make any decisions until the noise settles, and I can see clearly what's on the other side of it." She looked at what was on the other side of it. Ruth Garrison's carriage disappearing around the corner. The county record with her name on it. 312 pages of documented truth in her satchel. Vivian standing at the bottom of the courthouse steps talking to Hargrove. Doing the right thing the hard way, which was the only way it counted. Mrs. Aldridge appearing from somewhere with a look of profound satisfaction and heading in the direction of the Whitmore carriage. And beside her this man, who had crossed a crowded room to sit next to her. Who had said "we" when he meant it. Who had stood with her through every piece of this without managing her or deciding for her or asking her to be smaller. "Yes," she settled. He turned to look at her. She turned to look at him. "I'm not the woman I was at that wedding," she said. I don't mean I've changed. I mean I'm more of what I was then." "Does that make sense?" "It makes complete sense," he said. "I have work I want to do," she said, "my own work. A proper workshop. A name on things. I've spent 12 years being anonymous and I'm finished with that. Whatever comes next," she paused. "It doesn't replace the work. It goes alongside it." "I know that," he said. "I wouldn't want it any other way." She looked at him steadily. "You should know that clearly. Before anything else. Evelyn." He said her name with the same quiet certainty he brought to everything. "I fell for a woman who spent 3 weeks restoring a painting in a rented room without knowing whose collection it belonged to. The work was interesting. I fell for a woman who sat in a chair at the edge of a room full of people laughing at her and didn't flinch. I fell for a woman who found a covered signature and spent 4 days bringing it back, one layer at a time, because she believed what was underneath was worth finding." He paused. "I know what the work is. I know what it means to you. I'm not asking you to choose." She was quiet for a moment. "Then what are you asking?" she said. "I'm asking," he said, "if you'll walk beside me, not ahead." "Beside," he paused, "that's all." She thought about what she had told him weeks ago. In the East Library, when she was deciding whether to be angry about the Flemish painting. Being bothered and falling apart are two different things. She thought about Ruth's grandmother closing her eyes and walking every inch of land she'd loved, keeping it so clearly in her mind that she could draw it 60 years later. She thought about the covered signature she'd brought back, slow and patient and certain, because she believed it was worth finding. She had spent 34 years being the woman at the edge of the room, being the covered signature, being the thing most people looked at and decided not to see. She was done with that. Not bitter. Done. "Yes," she said. Simple, clear, the most complete sentence she had ever spoken. He exhaled the same barely there breath she had noticed in the still room. She knew it now. She knew what it meant when he let himself do that. It meant he had been holding something and had finally set it down. "All right," he said. They stood there for a moment longer in the November afternoon. The gold light and the cold air and everything settled and real between them. And then Evelyn picked up her satchel, 312 pages of truth. Every word of it hers, her name on every page, and she straightened her spine the way she had straightened it on the morning. She walked into Vivian's wedding. And she walked down the courthouse steps. Alexander fell into step beside her. Not behind, not ahead, beside. The woman who had been invited to a wedding to be laughed at walked out of that courthouse into the Virginia afternoon with her name in the public record. The truth documented and delivered, and the most respected man in the county walking at her side, not because she had been rescued, not because she had been chosen from among better options, not because she had waited long enough to be rewarded, because she had done the work, because she had been herself. completely and without apology, in every room they had ever tried to make her small in. Because she had looked at every covered, damaged, discarded thing she had ever been handed and said, "I see you. I know you're worth finding. Let me bring you back." She had brought herself back. That was what she had done. And she had done it entirely on her own, which meant that everything that came after was hers to choose freely. From the only position that had ever mattered, not from need, not from rescue, not from running out of other options. From strength, from the ground she had built herself. One careful, patient, documented truth at a time. Evelyn Marlowe walked into the rest of her life knowing exactly who she was, and she never looked back.